Midnight, preserved bones in the church cellar bore 17 sets of teeth marks, but the two priests had already vanished into the winter night. Before we descend together into this mystery, tell me, where are you listening from right now? Are you somewhere warm and safe? Good. You should keep it that way. 021, if you're ready to hear what truly happened in St. Bartholomew's Parish during the winter of 1872, then subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because what you're about to hear isn't merely a story. It's a documented case that the church attempted to bury for over a century. Share this with someone who appreciates true historical mysteries, and let's work to uncover the truth together. 049, some secrets deserve to be brought into the light, no matter their darkness. Upon Ashford Hollow, the winter of 1872 descended like a sentence handed down from above. Nestled deep in the Allegheny Mountains, the small Pennsylvania mining community had weathered harsh winters before, but nothing compared to the cold that settled over them that November. 113, in relentless waves, the snow fell, and temperatures plummeted so severely that the town's wells froze solid by Thanksgiving. Into this frozen isolation arrived Father Hinrich Fogel and Father Damien Cross. On a grey Tuesday morning, Mary O'Connell first saw them, their black carriage appearing through the snow like an omen. 137, she was 16, standing outside Murphy's General Store with her younger brother Thomas, when the priests emerged with an otherworldly stillness that made her instinctively uneasy. Tall and gaunt was Father Fogel, his face angular and colourless, with eyes that seemed to look through the world rather than at it. His companion, Father Cross, was built like the miners who worked the coal seams, broad-shouldered and solid, with thick hands that seemed incongruous with his clerical collar. 208, with a precision that felt rehearsed, both men moved, as if every gesture had been practiced before a mirror. "They don't look like any priests I've ever seen," Thomas whispered. Mary couldn't disagree. Something was off about them, though she couldn't articulate what. Perhaps it was the way they surveyed the town, not with pastoral concern, but with the calculating gaze of men assessing inventory. 236, sent by the Diocese of Pittsburgh, the priests had come to replace Father O'Malley, who had succumbed to pneumonia 3 weeks earlier. For 3 weeks, the town of 800 souls had been without spiritual guidance, and many saw the arrival of 2 priests as providential. Even the mining company that controlled most of Ashford Hollow had contributed funds for their travel, hoping renewed faith would improve morale during the punishing winter. 303, with characteristic warmth, Reverend Mother Agnes, who ran the small convent school where Mary occasionally helped teach, rushed forward to greet them. "Welcome, fathers. We've been praying for your safe arrival. The rectory is prepared, and the community is eager to receive your ministry." Father Fogel's thin lips curved into what might have been mistaken for a smile. 327, "We are honored to serve," he said in heavily accented English. German asterisk, Mary thought. "We understand the challenges of isolation in winter. We have considerable experience with remote communities." That afternoon, the priests celebrated their first Mass. Filled with curious parishioners seeking both warmth and spiritual comfort was St. Bartholomew's Church, a modest stone building with stained glass windows donated, music, by Pittsburgh benefactors. 401, in her usual pew with Thomas and their widowed mother, Catherine, Mary sat, observing as the 2 priests moved through the liturgy with unnerving synchronization. On sacrifice, specifically the profound sacrifices required of true believers, Father Fogel's sermon focused. With hypnotic rhythm, his voice rose and fell, speaking of Abraham's willingness to offer Isaac, of the martyrs who gave their flesh for faith, of the Eucharist itself as the ultimate symbol of consumption and transformation. 434, "God asks everything of us," Father Fogel intoned, his pale eyes sweeping across the congregation. "Not merely our prayers or our attendance. He asks for our very essence. Are we prepared to give it? Are we worthy of such divine hunger?" The phrasing struck Mary as odd. Divine hunger star. 457, she'd never heard a priest speak of God that way. After Mass, in the church hall for a reception, the community gathered. Among the parishioners, the priests moved, accepting offerings of preserved foods and winter vegetables. Mary noticed that neither man actually ate anything provided, politely declining with mentions of fasting and spiritual discipline. 518, More troubling was the way Father Cross observed certain parishioners, particularly those who were alone, who had no close family, whose absence might not be immediately noticed. He engaged them in lengthy conversations, asking pointed questions about their living situations, their routines, whether they lived alone. Perhaps his assessing who needs the most pastoral attention, Mary's mother suggested when Mary mentioned it later. 5:45, but Mary had seen predators before, wild cats in the forest, watching deer with patient calculation. Father Cross's expression reminded her of that. Your mother raises an excellent point about community care. From directly behind Mary, Father Foggle's voice came, making her startle. He had approached with complete silence. 6:08, you are Mary O'Connell, correct? I'm told you assist at the convent school. Yes, Father. Admirable. The Church values those who serve the vulnerable. He paused, his tongue darting briefly across his lips. Tell me, do you attend confession regularly? Every 2 weeks, Father. Excellent. We will be offering extended confession hours. 6:32, these are spiritually dark times, and many souls carry burdens that require special attention. Saturday evenings, beginning after the Angelus bells, will remain available until midnight if necessary. The sacrament of reconciliation is particularly nourishing for both penitent and confessor. Again, the word choice seemed wrong. *nourishing*. 6:58, over the following 2 weeks, the priests established their routine. Each morning, dawn mass, afternoon visits to the homebound, evening confessions on Wednesdays and Saturdays. They rarely appeared in town during daylight hours, conducting their ministry almost exclusively at the church or in private homes. Administrative duties were managed by Father Foggle, while Father Cross focused on visiting those who couldn't attend services. 7:26, on December 3rd, the first disappearance occurred. Jacob Mueller, a bachelor miner in his 40s, failed to report for his shift at Crown Creek Mine. This wasn't entirely unusual. Men sometimes fell ill or drank too heavily, but Jacob was known for his reliability. When his foreman sent someone to check his cabin at the edge of town, they found it locked from the outside, his winter coat still hanging by the door, and no signs of struggle or departure. 7:56, probably went to Pittsburgh without telling anyone, people suggested. Maybe he had family business. But Mary remembered seeing Jacob enter St. Bartholomew's for Saturday confession 2 nights before. Walking home late after helping Reverend Mother Agnes, she'd watched Jacob climb the church steps, shoulders hunched against the cold. 8:17, she'd waited a few minutes, stamping her feet against the chill, but never saw him leave. Exactly 1 week later came the second disappearance. The night after Wednesday confession, Sarah Brennan, a young widow who worked as a seamstress, vanished. Her 7-year-old daughter woke to find her mother gone, breakfast unmade, and the front door standing open despite the howling blizzard outside. 8:42, search parties were organized by Town Constable William Garrett. Snagged on a fence post halfway between her home and the church was Sarah's shawl, but any tracks had been obliterated by the snow. Most assumed she'd become disoriented in the storm and frozen somewhere in the woods. They'd find her body come spring, they said. 9:03, but Mary noticed what others seemed to miss. Shortly before vanishing, both Jacob and Sarah had attended confession. Both times, Mary had seen them enter the church. Neither time had she witnessed them leave. She began keeping careful records in her diary, who attended confession, when they went, what time they returned home or didn't return home. 9:27, she tried discussing her observations with Thomas, but her brother dismissed them. You're seeing patterns where there aren't any, Mary. People disappear in winter. It's tragic, but it happens. Still, Mary couldn't shake her growing certainty that something was, deeply wrong. She noticed other details. The priests had requested that Patrick O'Reilly, the elderly sacristan, leave the church locked after evening services. 9:54, they would secure it themselves after confessions concluded. They'd also had new locks installed on the cellar door, claiming they needed secure storage for valuable ecclesiastical items. On December 18th, young Timothy Flanagan disappeared. Timothy was 19, a coal miner engaged to Emma Walsh, planning a spring wedding. 10:18, Mary had seen him at Saturday confession, laughing nervously with friends before entering the church. He'd seemed anxious, understandable for a young man confessing whatever youthful indiscretions troubled his conscience. He never came home. Emma was inconsolable, insisting Timothy would never abandon her voluntarily. 10:38, now genuinely alarmed with 3 disappearances in as many weeks, Constable Garrett began investigating more aggressively. It was Patrick O'Reilly who finally discovered something that transformed concern into horror. Early one morning to prepare for Mass, the elderly sacristan arrived and decided to fetch old vestments from the cellar storage. 11 o'clock, the cellar was rarely used, a damp stone space beneath the church holding forgotten furniture and supplies. As Patrick descended with his lantern, he noticed changes that made his blood run cold. Dark stains that hadn't been there before bore on the floor near the old coal furnace. Stacked against the wall were large clay vessels, the kind used for preserving meat. 11:25, vessels Patrick didn't remember ordering or receiving. And there was a smell, faint but unmistakable, that triggered something primal in his mind, sweet and wrong. Most disturbing was a locked storage room Patrick didn't recall existing. A new door, a new padlock, installed without his knowledge. When he reported this to Constable Garrett, the lawman's expression went grave. 11:51, together with 3 trusted miners, they returned that afternoon while the priests were supposedly visiting sick parishioners. What they found in that cellar would haunt them forever. Preserved meat was contained in the clay vessels, but not from any animal they recognized. The locked room held tools arranged with surgical precision. 12:12, saws, knives, implements that belonged in a butcher's shop, all meticulously cleaned, but showing traces of use. And in the furnace, partially consumed by flames, were bones, human bones bearing marks where flesh had been carefully removed. Most damning were the journals they found in the priest's living quarters, written in German, detailing what they called sacred research and the deeper mysteries of communion. 12:39, one passage, later translated, read, **The Church has made metaphor of truth. We restore the ancient understanding. To know God's creation, one must consume it wholly. The flesh contains what the soul reveals. The town erupted. Men grabbed weapons. Women barricaded themselves with their children. To Pittsburgh requesting immediate assistance, Constable Garrett sent urgent telegrams. 13:06, but when the hastily formed mob reached the rectory, they found it empty. Vanished had Father Fogel and Father Cross, taking only what they could carry quickly. Their rooms were abandoned, though carefully arranged, as if they'd known this moment would come and had prepared for it. Immediately closed was the church, sealed was the cellar. 13:28, with urgent messages to church authorities and law enforcement across Pennsylvania, telegraph wires hummed. But Mary couldn't stop thinking about the old abandoned chapel in the woods, St. Adalbert's, closed for 20 years after the logging camp it served shut down. It stood just 3 miles from town, hidden in the forest, and she'd seen tracks in the snow heading that direction just 2 days ago. 13:53, fresh tracks. Made recently. Someone was at St. Adalbert's. And Mary had a terrible suspicion that the priests hadn't simply fled. They'd retreated to a prepared location. And if more victims had been taken, but not yet processed, there might still be time to save them. That evening, she shared her theory with Constable Garrett. 14:17, he listened carefully, then nodded grimly. We organize a search party at first light. But Mary, this will be dangerous. These aren't just criminals. He struggled for words. I know what they are, Mary said quietly. And I know we have to stop them. Over Ashford Hollow, dawn broke cold and clear. 14:38, the first cloudless sky in weeks, revealing a landscape transformed into frozen white silence. In her bedroom, Mary stood, dressing in her warmest clothes, while her mother's worried voice carried up from the kitchen. You cannot go with them, Mary. It's too dangerous. Let the men handle this. Ma, if there are survivors, if Sarah Brennan is still alive, she'll need another woman there. 15:04, she'll need someone she trusts. Mary descended the stairs, her diary tucked into her coat pocket. Dr. Whitmore agrees. He's asked me to assist if we find anyone who needs medical attention. Drawn with fear was Catherine O'Connell's face, but she recognized the determination in her daughter's eyes. It was the same stubbornness that had characterized Mary's father before the mine took him. 15:30, then Thomas goes with you. Promise me you'll stay together. I promise. By 7 o'clock, outside Murphy's General Store, the search party had assembled. In the morning cold stood 23 men, miners, shopkeepers, farmers united by righteous anger and desperate hope. Overnight from the county seat, Sheriff Duncan had arrived, bringing 3 deputies and proper authority to what might otherwise have been a vigilante action. Beside Dr. 1601, Whitmore, Mary stood, who carried a medical bag and wore an expression of grim determination. Protectively near his sister, Thomas positioned himself, one hand resting on their father's old hunting knife. The group was addressed by Sheriff Duncan, his breath frosting in the air. We don't know what we'll find at St. Adalbert's. We don't know if the priests are there, if they're armed, or if any victims are still alive. Our priorities are clear. 1627, rescue survivors first. Apprehend suspects second. Preserve evidence third. No vigilante justice. These men will face proper legal proceedings. Understood. A murmur of agreement, though Mary could see barely restrained rage in many faces. These were friends and neighbors of the missing, and the discovery in St. 1650, Bartholomew's cellar had revealed horrors that defied comprehension. Forward stepped old Patrick O'Reilly, clutching a hand-drawn map. I was caretaker at St. Adalbert's for 10 years before it closed. I know every room, every hiding spot. If they're using it, I can tell you where they'd be. Following the old logging road, they set out, snow crunching beneath their boots. 1715, still partially visible were the fresh tracks Mary had noticed days ago, leading steadily northeast into the forest, 2 sets of bootprints, occasionally disturbed by marks suggesting something heavy being dragged. Nearly 2 hours through knee-deep snow took the 3-mile journey. Around them, the forest closed, towering pines and skeletal oaks creating a maze of shadows. 1742, despite her gloves, Mary's fingers went numb, and her breath came in white clouds that dissipated slowly in the still air. As they crested a ridge, Patrick pointed ahead. There you can see the bell tower. From the trees like a monument to abandonment emerged St. Adalbert's Chapel. The wooden structure had suffered 2 decades of neglect. 1804, the roof was sagging, windows broken, snow drifted against the walls, but smoke rose from a chimney, a thin grey column against the pale sky. Someone was definitely there. With a raised hand, Sheriff Duncan halted the group, dividing them into teams. Some would circle, music, to block rear exits. Others would watch the sides. The main group would approach from the front. 1828, Miss O'Connell, you stay with Dr. Whitmore behind the main group, the sheriff ordered. You don't enter until we've secured the building. As they approached, Mary noticed details that intensified her dread. With fresh lumber, the chapel's main door had been reinforced. From the inside, broken windows were boarded. 1850, this place had been fortified by someone, transforming a forgotten church into something else, something defensive. More troubling were tracks leading to a root cellar beside the chapel, the kind used for storing provisions. The wooden doors had been opened recently. Snow had been cleared from the entrance. The main door was tested by Sheriff Duncan. Locked. He knocked loudly. 1911, Father Foggle, Father Cross, this is Sheriff Duncan of Center County. Open the door. We need to speak with you. Silence stretched for long moments. Then from inside they heard humming. Someone was humming a Latin hymn *pange lingua gloriosae*, a song about the body and blood of Christ. The door opened. In the doorway, backlit by lamplight, stood Father Foggle. 1935, he looked remarkably composed, cassock clean, hair combed, face serene, but his eyes held something new. Not fear or guilt, but fevered conviction. Sheriff Duncan, he said calmly. I wondered when you would arrive, though I confess disappointment in how quickly you rejected what you cannot understand. Where is Father Cross? Inside in prayer. We've been engaged in deep spiritual contemplation. That unsettling, almost smile. 2005, would you care to join us in our devotions? Step outside slowly. Hands visible. With eerie grace, Foggle complied. As he emerged, several men gripped their weapons tighter, rage barely contained. Constable Garrett, restrain him. Search him for weapons. As Garrett moved forward with rope, Foggle spoke again. You found our preparations in the cellar, I assume. 2031, our research materials. You admit it. Thomas burst out. You admit to what you've done. Toward the young man, Foggle turned his pale gaze. I admit to pursuing truth that the Church has deliberately obscured. Tell me, when the faithful consume the Eucharist, what do they believe they're doing? They believe they're consuming the body of Christ, but it's merely bread, a symbol, a lie to comfort the weak. 9 p.m., his voice intensified. We discovered the actual path, the genuine transformation that occurs when one truly consumes. Enough. Sheriff Duncan cut him off. Where is Father Cross? Where are the people you took? Across Foggle's face, something flickered. A strange excitement. Father Cross has completed his journey. 21-23, as for your neighbors, some have also reached completion. But one remains. She has been resistant to understanding. As nausea rolled through her, Mary felt Dr. Whitmore's steadying hand on her shoulder. To 6 men, Sheriff Duncan gestured. Inside. Carefully. Past Foggle into the chapel's dark interior, they moved. Mary heard boots on wooden floors, voices calling out as they searched. 21:51, then a shout, *Sheriff, in here, *Sheriff Duncan turned to Dr. Whitmore. Stay with Miss O'Connell until I assess the situation. He strode toward the chapel, other men following. In the snow, Mary stood, shivering, listening to muffled exclamations from inside. Despite orders, Thomas had followed, and after a moment he emerged, his face ashen. 22:16, he stumbled to a snowbank and wretched. Thomas. Mary ran to her brother. What did you see? He couldn't speak, just shook his head violently. When he finally looked at her, his eyes were haunted. Father Cross, his Mary, don't go in there. But Sheriff Duncan was beckoning to Dr. Whitmore. Doctor, we need you. 22:40, and Miss O'Connell, there's a survivor. A woman. She won't speak. Won't move. She might respond to you. With desperate hope, Mary's heart surged. Sarah Brennan. Can't tell. She's in severe shock. Come, but steel yourself. Dr. Whitmore gripped Mary's arm. Stay close to me. Focus only on helping the survivor. Don't look at anything else. Understood. Mary nodded and entered the chapel. 23:07, the interior was a nightmare of calculated perversion. The pews had been pushed aside. Where the altar should have stood, there was instead a large table, preparation table. Mary realized with horror, with channels carved for drainage, tools hung on the wall with surgical precision. Everything was clean, organized, methodical. And there in a chair facing where the altar once stood, sat Father Cross. 23:34, he was arranged peacefully, hands folded, face serene, but his throat bore a single deep wound. He had taken his own life rather than face capture. On his lap lay a letter written in careful script, confessing to what he called the music, most profound spiritual discovery of our age. 23:56, where's the survivor? Mary managed to ask, forcing her gaze away. A deputy pointed to a small door at the chapel's rear. Back room. She won't let us near her. Screams when we approach. Mary moved toward the door, Dr. Whitmore following. Inside the small room, once a priest's modest quarters, she saw a figure huddled in the corner, wrapped in filthy blankets, hair matted, eyes wide and unseeing. Sarah. 2400 hours 24, Mary breathed, recognizing her. Sarah Brennan. At her name, Sarah's eyes focused slightly. She made a sound, not words, but something between a whimper and a moan. Slowly, Mary knelt, keeping her movements gentle. Sarah, it's Mary O'Connell from Ashford Hollow. You're safe now. We're here to take you home. 2400 hours 48, your daughter is waiting for you. At the mention of her daughter, something broke in Sarah's expression. Tears began streaming down her face. She reached toward Mary with trembling hands. "That's it," Dr. Whitmore said softly, moving closer. "Mary, keep talking to her. Let her hear a familiar voice. You're safe, Sarah." 25:08, "The priests can't hurt you anymore. We're taking you home. Your little girl needs her mother. She's been so brave, but she needs you." Slowly, carefully, Sarah allowed Mary to wrap clean blankets around her. She was severely malnourished, and Dr. Whitmore noticed what appeared to be rope burns on her wrists and ankles. 25:27, she'd been restrained, but she was alive. "How long was she here?" Mary asked quietly. "Based on her condition, since her disappearance." 18 days. Dr. Whitmore's voice was tight with controlled rage. "They kept her alive deliberately, waiting for whatever purpose they had planned." Outside they heard raised voices. 25:53, Sheriff Duncan was interrogating Father Fogel, demanding to know what had happened to the others, Jacob Mueller, Timothy Flanagan, any other victims. Fogel's response, calm and matter-of-fact, carried through the chapel. "They have been transformed. Elevated. Their physical forms contributed to a higher understanding. We preserved them, studied them, learned from them." 26:16, "The body is merely a vessel, Sheriff. What matters is the knowledge gained from where are their remains?" Duncan demanded. "Their families deserve to bury them properly." "The root cellar," Fogel said simply. "What we couldn't utilize is preserved there. We are not wasteful. That would be disrespectful." Despite the sheriff's orders to wait, several men moved toward the root cellar. 26:40, "What they found there, preserved remains, carefully labeled vessels, meticulous records of their research, would provide evidence for the trial, but would also scar everyone who witnessed it." On Sarah, Mary focused, helping Dr. Whitmore assess her physical condition. Beyond malnutrition and dehydration, Sarah seemed to have no serious injuries. 27:05, but her psychological state was another matter entirely. She hadn't spoken a single word, just clung to Mary and wept silently. "We need to get her back to town," Dr. Whitmore said. "She needs warmth, food, water, and rest. The psychological healing will take much longer." As they prepared to leave, carrying Sarah on a makeshift stretcher, Mary heard Sheriff Duncan reading Father Fogel his formal charges. The priest listened with that same unsettling serenity, as if the accusations of kidnapping and murder were merely academic disagreements. "You, 27:42, will never understand," Fogel said as they bound his hands. "You live in comfortable ignorance, accepting metaphor as truth, refusing to see what lies beneath. We sought genuine communion, genuine knowledge. The Church has forgotten what the earliest Christians understood." "The earliest Christians," Father Brennan interrupted, having arrived with a second wave of men from Ashford Hollow, "understood love and sacrifice, not whatever abomination you've committed here. 28:17, you've perverted everything sacred, and you'll face justice for it." Fogel's smile was pitying. "Justice? Whose justice? Human law? Divine law? They're not the same, Father. Not remotely the same." The journey back to Ashford Hollow took 3 hours. They moved slowly, carrying Sarah carefully, while Sheriff Duncan's deputies guarded Father Fogel. 28:41, a second team arriving from Bellefontaine would transport and secure the evidence from St. Adalbert's. As they emerged from the forest, Mary saw the entire town gathered on the main street, waiting anxiously for news. When they saw Sarah Brennan alive, a cheer went up, relief and joy mixed with lingering horror at what had been discovered. 29:05, when she saw her mother, Emma Walsh ran forward, sobbing. Sarah finally spoke her first words since being rescued. "My baby. My baby." Mother and daughter embraced, both weeping, and for a moment the horror receded, replaced by profound gratitude that at least one person had been saved. But as Mary looked back toward the forest, toward the chapel hidden in those woods, she couldn't shake the feeling that the full story remained untold. 29:37, Father Fogel's journals, his cryptic references to deeper understanding and ancient truths. What had he really believed? What had driven two educated, ordained priests to commit such unspeakable acts? The answers, she would discover, were somehow worse than the crimes themselves. On March 15, 1873, in the Center County Courthouse in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, the trial of Father Hinrich Vogel began. 30:06, one of the most sensational trials in the state's history, it drew reporters from Philadelphia, New York, and even Washington. Daily with spectators, many of whom had traveled days just to glimpse the man they called the Cannibal Priest, the courtroom was packed. Every day of the trial, Mary O'Connell attended, sitting in the gallery with her mother and Thomas. 30:31, she had been called as a witness. Her diary, with its meticulous records of confession times and disappearances, had become crucial evidence. But more than her testimony, Mary felt compelled to understand, to hear Vogel's explanation, if one existed, for the inexplicable evil he'd committed. Physically, Sarah Brennan had recovered, but remained largely silent about her ordeal. Dr. 31:00, Whitmore testified that she exhibited severe psychological trauma and might never fully recover her previous mental state. Music, she remembered being taken from the church after confession, being held in the chapel's back room, overhearing conversations that suggested unspeakable things. But her mind had protected her by blocking out the worst details. 31:23, a case that was both overwhelming and horrifying was laid out by the prosecution, led by District Attorney James Morrison. The physical evidence alone was damning: the preserved human remains found in St. Adalbert's root cellar, the tools bearing traces of human tissue, the journals detailing what Vogel called his sacred research. 31:48, but it was the journals themselves that provided the most disturbing testimony. Translated from German by a professor from the University of Pennsylvania, Father Vogel's writings revealed a twisted theology that had evolved over years. At a seminary in Bavaria, he and Father Cross had met, where they'd both become fascinated with early church history, particularly the accusations of cannibalism leveled against Christians by Roman authorities in the 1st and 2nd centuries. 32:20, what if those accusations weren't entirely false? Vogel had written, "What if the earliest Christians understood something profound that later generations sanitized and metaphorized? The Eucharist declares, 'This is my body. This is my blood.' What if that was once literal truth, not symbolic gesture?" From there, the journals traced their intellectual descent into madness. 32:46, they began studying ancient heresies, obscure texts, accounts of cultures that practiced ritual cannibalism. They convinced themselves they were rediscovering lost knowledge, that consuming human flesh wasn't sacrilege, but the deepest form of communion, a way to literally incorporate another soul's essence. The body contains memories. 33:09, Vogel had written, "Eating the flesh allows us to access those memories, to understand the lived experience of another human being in the most intimate way possible. This is true empathy, true connection, true love." Their first victim, according to the journals, had been in Bavaria, an elderly parishioner who died naturally. 33:33, they'd taken small portions of the body before burial, consuming them in what they described as a sacramental experiment. The experience had been, in Vogel's words, revelatory. From there, they'd progressed to more active procurement, always in isolated communities where their activities could remain hidden, always choosing victims who wouldn't be immediately missed. 33:56, the elderly, the solitary, those on society's margins. When they'd been assigned to Ashford Hollow, they saw it as ideal, a small, isolated community, a brutal winter that would make investigation difficult, and a population of miners and laborious people who disappeared regularly due to accidents or simply moving on. 34:20, during his testimony, which he insisted on giving against his lawyer's advice, Father Vogel showed no remorse. Instead, he spoke with the fervor of a prophet explaining divine revelation to the ignorant. "You sit in judgment," he said, addressing the courtroom. "But you understand nothing. You consume animals without thought, without gratitude for the life given. 34:46, you reduce the sacred mystery of consumption to base survival. But I understood. I honored those who contributed to my enlightenment. I preserved them, studied them, incorporated their essence. They live on through me. You murdered them, District Attorney Morrison said flatly. You kidnapped, imprisoned, and murdered innocent people. 35:11, I freed them, Fogel countered, his pale eyes blazing with conviction. I freed them from the prison of isolated existence. Now they are part of something greater, part of a communion that transcends death itself. And Sarah Brennan? Morrison demanded. Why did you keep her alive? What was your plan for her? For the first time, Fogel hesitated. 35:36, she was special. Young enough to be educated, music, to potentially understand. I thought if she witnessed enough, if she understood the theology behind the practice, she might willingly participate in the transformation, might become an apostle of this rediscovered truth. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. He'd planned to indoctrinate her, to turn her into an accomplice. 36:01, instead, Morrison said, you traumatized a young woman so severely that she may never fully recover. You destroyed her life. I offered her transcendence, Fogel replied calmly. She was too weak to accept it. For less than 2 hours, the jury deliberated. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts of murder, kidnapping, and desecration of human remains. 36:27, at the time, Pennsylvania had no death penalty, so Fogel was sentenced to life imprisonment at Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, to be held in complete solitary confinement until death. As guards led him from the courtroom, Father Fogel turned to address the spectators one final time. You think you've ended this, he said, his voice carrying an eerie certainty. 36:51, but truth cannot be unlearned. Others will discover what I discovered. Others will understand that the barrier between spiritual and physical communion is illusion. This is not the end. This is merely the beginning. Then he was gone, swallowed by the prison system, destined to spend the rest of his life alone in a cell. But his final words haunted Mary. 37:17, asterisk this is merely the beginning. Asterisk with unusual warmth, spring came to Ashford Hollow, melting the snow that had buried the town for 4 months. Scarred emerged the landscape, not just by winter's cruelty, but by the knowledge of what had happened in their midst. Empty stood St. Bartholomew's Church. Indefinitely, pending a decision about its future, the diocese had ordered it closed. 37:45, some argued for demolishing it entirely, erasing the structure that had been defiled by Fogel and Cross. Others insisted that would give evil too much power. Better to reconsecrate the building and reclaim it for God. One afternoon in late April, Mary visited the church, standing before its locked doors. In the spring sunshine, the building looked ordinary, just stone and wood and glass, but she knew what lay beneath. 38:11, cleaned, blessed, and sealed had been the cellar, but no amount of holy water could wash away what had happened there. I thought I'd find you here, a voice said behind her. She turned to see Father Brennan, the elderly priest from Millbrook who had taken over pastoral duties for Ashford Hollow. He looked older than his 65 years, burdened by the knowledge that his church, his life's work, had somehow produced men capable of such evil. 38:40, I keep trying to understand, Mary said. How did it happen? How did 2 priests, men who took vows of service and compassion, become monsters? For a long moment, Father Brennan was silent. I've been a priest for 40 years, Mary. I've heard thousands of confessions, counseled hundreds of troubled souls, and I've learned that evil rarely announces itself with horns and fire. 39:07, it creeps in slowly, disguising itself as something noble, as higher understanding, as special knowledge. He gestured toward the church. Fogel and Cross convinced themselves they were pursuing truth. That's how it always begins, with the arrogant belief that you've seen something others haven't, that conventional morality doesn't apply to you because you're operating on a higher plane. 39:34, pride is the first sin for a reason. But they were educated men, Mary protested. Seminary trained. How did no one notice their beliefs were twisted? Because they hid it well. And because institutions, even the church, aren't perfect. We're made of humans with human failings. We trusted their credentials, their presentation, their apparent piety. 39:59, We failed to see what lurked beneath. Father Brennan's voice broke slightly. We failed your community. We failed Jacob Mueller and Timothy Flanagan and all the others whose names we may never know. From the trial, Mary had learned that Fogel and Cross had likely committed similar crimes in at least 3 other locations before arriving in Ashford Hollow. 40:20, their journals referenced previous experiments and earlier subjects, but they'd been careful not to provide specific details. Investigators were following leads across Pennsylvania and into Europe, trying to identify other victims, but the full scope of their crimes might never be known. How is Sarah? Father Brennan asked gently. 40:43, better. Physically healed. But she barely speaks, and when she does, it's only to her daughter. Dr. Whitmore says she may improve with time, but the trauma. Mary shook her head. What they did to her wasn't just physical imprisonment. They tried to break her mind, to make her believe their twisted theology was truth. 41:06, in the months since the trial, Sarah had slowly shared fragments of her ordeal with Mary, the only person besides Dr. Whitmore she felt safe with. In that back room, Fogel had kept her, visiting her daily to discuss his philosophy. He'd shown her his journals, explained his beliefs, tried to convince her that what he was doing was sacred rather than profane. 41:29, he wanted me to understand, Sarah had whispered during one difficult conversation. He kept saying I was intelligent enough to see the truth, that if I just opened my mind, I'd recognize the profound nature of his work. He spoke about transcendence and communion and breaking through the illusion of separate existence. 41:51, he made it sound almost beautiful. That was the worst part, how he made horror sound like enlightenment. Calculated and cruel had been the psychological manipulation. Deliberately, Fogel had kept Sarah alive, not as a future victim, but as a potential convert, someone he could indoctrinate and use to legitimize his actions. 42:15, he'd believed that if he could convince one person to willingly participate, it would validate